Hello,
We can
friends.
talk
Welcome
about
back
that.
to another episode of the Wild User Interviews podcast. Today, in person, a meeting of the minds. Brown Dragon meeting Black Dragon, two most famous people in the near ecosystem for different reasons. Welcome, Illia.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad that you're finally here.
So am I.
It's taken a while. Maybe we can blame Maggie. But I do feel like the timing is very good for the strangest of reasons. If we bump Maria from DevHub, this will be podcast 69. And there's also been a lot of announcements yesterday around chain abstraction, AI, everything. The markets are pumping on the news of these podcasts too. So
The ecosystem been working really hard. I think the past year you can see results by themselves. There's growth across almost every dimension. And yeah, it's been exciting to announce some of the things that I've been working on, as well as see other folks showcasing what they've been working on.
it's been good. The challenge for content creators in the weeks leading up to a conference is that everyone saves up the good stuff for the conference.
So
So
now you have work cut out for you.
oh yeah, right through the Christmas break, nonstop. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, because we only have 1 hour. I usually ramble for about 3, and it's hour 2 and 3 that are actually good. So I wanted to just go straight to the meat. Is there anything that you have not been asked in previous podcasts that you've always wanted to share?
Good question. I don't think there's much. I'm generally pretty open book and share a lot of things, but also we've had a lot of stuff, as you said, saved up for yesterday. There's just a lot of interesting things and a lot of interesting nuggets that we can discuss now. Everything from AI to how we can speed up the blockchain to how I think the world will change effectively with the business technologies.
Usually the podcast tries to bring out like the human side of people. I know that you're an avid
I
listener.
don't have a human part.
with so
Yeah,
many.
it's all dragon part.
Are you that early version of the Tesla robots? Just a little chunkier so that no one expects. I actually wanted to ask you, a good segue would be science fiction. I read on one of your tweets that you have read a lot of science fiction. You've written some science fiction.
Yep.
Where can we read that?
So we actually built Wiz for All from DevHub. We built a publishing platform back when I was in university called Escalibro.
That was you?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so it was built because I wanted to publish some. And we actually, not with my work, but we actually even physically published some of other authors who were writing there. I'm not sure if everything is up because the servers were in Kharkiv. So we'll need to check. But one way or another, yeah, there's a bunch of novels that are started, but none of them are finished.
Okay, those are the best stories. It could go in any direction. So how much science fiction do you read until you start writing yourself? Did you get bored of the shit that you were reading, or were you always like uniquely curious and creative?
Yeah, always. I think even, I'm trying to remember when it started, but even when I was like 6, 7, I was always imagining scenes and worlds and like action scenes and like things happening. And for me, actually, reading was always like stimulated that. And then I would want to go and write something. Now I also would get easily bored. And especially after you like play out in your head some scenario, you're like, okay, I know what's going to happen. It's like too much work to write it down,
Wow.
which is a character flaw. But yeah, I've through my teenage years, at some point, somebody brought like a 700 megabyte CD ROM full of text files. So not like, it's not docs, it's not PDFs, it's like actual text. So it's 700 million effectively characters.
How many
Of-
Harry Potter books is that? A lot.
It's like, I don't know, 10,000 books or something. And so I was just reading that. And it was everything from Harry Harrison, Asimov, as well as like Russian writers, Tugatsky, more traditional ones. A lot of fanfic on Star Wars was there. So a bunch of stuff. So I read that. I think I read almost everything that was on that in the span of like 3 or 4 years. And so in general, because I read a lot on internet, I read in megabytes of text, not in books, in pages. So like I know like I can read, a megabyte of a book in Russian in about 8, 9 hours, which is like, I don't actually know how it converts into pages.
He's an actual cyborg. He's not even human. It's
But yeah, that's been the story. And I've been starting to read more in English. I've been rereading some things I've read before in Russian, like on the fiction side. But for me, actually, English fiction always been like a little bit dry.
Yeah.
Like Russian is just so much more descriptive and rich in expression. And I think that they teach you when you write in English to write for like fifth
Succinct.
graders, sixth
Yeah.
graders. And so just like way simpler.
Yeah, I remember reading The Master and the Margarita, the English version. I'm not exaggerating that half the book were footnotes, both historical references,
Yes, yeah.
cultural references, and even like expressions. It got to a point where I was like, I'm not reading a book. I'm reading like a guide
history,
to the
yeah.
book.
Yeah. You're reading
Um,
like a short summary of Russian culture.
And the worst part is that this would be in 2017 or 2013. I went back to Venezuela. I left the book there halfway read. So, much like your stories, I just imagined the rest of the story, which probably gives it a very different ending, I'm sure. That's interesting. I was also an avid reader as a child, but I never made it to the computer side of things. I just kept reading and writing and talking shit. I've got double degree in arts and law. I mean, it's literally my only skill. Read, write, talking shit. So you can make money in it, but it's kind of limited when you really think about it. How did you transition into like useful, employable skills? You're reading in megabytes from prose.
I started coding when I was 10.
Who are your parents? Is this like a traditional upbringing or like?
Well, I do have a very technical my mom and my grandparents. My grandfather actually was designing control systems for USSR rockets.
Those are good.
Those were good, yeah,
stuff.
when he was designing. Yeah, so he was part of the program. My mom also has like a technical degree, and I think in her master's degree effectively was designing a modem back in like early 80s. So I do have a pretty tech focused family. Different generation of tech, but
Yeah. I've a few of my friends have started having children, and you may be getting this as a present, by the way, on the mail. I've seen the most hilarious like JavaScript for kids books. Did you have those type of like? Were you exposed to it at a very early age, or was it their lifestyle that you were curious in?
So it was less that and more. So I had a computer, like a first very very shitty computer when I was like 8, and it was like 386, which was probably like 3 or 4 years old at that time. And the only thing I could do there is play video games, which were based then. And so when I went to middle school, we had a computer class there. And we did have an informatics class where you program a turtle to go around. And I was like, oh, cool. I can build my own games. Like those games are not interesting. So I'll just build my own. And so I started just trying to build games. First was that turtle logo thing. And then effectively started learning Pascal. And the benefit is in my school, I had quite a few other kids who were also very similarly curious. You know some of them, Alex Shevchenko.
School for Special Children,
Yeah,
the
Vlad
X-Men
Frolov.
school.
One of my classmates, he's PhD in math, so he went a little bit different direction, but he was doing a lot. He was writing his own graphics library in assembly when he was 11 kind of thing. So we had a group of people in computer class, which was always trying to do something, to build something. And we had a very supporting teacher who was like awarded national Ukrainian award as well.
Hope he's also been awarded like a shitload of NEAR.
And so like it was a really good environment to learn and started participating in competitions, programming competitions, was continued building games. I effectively was trying to build games all of my teenage years. I've built a lot of stuff. We had this summer camp with shitty computers. And we literally brought them with us to summer camp. And so for fun, I was building a game a night that we would play the next day. And so we were like just churning like mini games effectively every day. And I would always leave some cheat codes for myself. And then by the end of high school, I was trying to build actually massive multiplayer online RPG with spaceships. That was my like, okay, this is the thing. I want spaceships flying, landing on planets, like learn all the geometry for that, all the like how to model physics of the rotating planets, all this thing. And so I built a server, started building front end, the rendering, everything. And then I pulled in a few more people to help me with design. And then realized to actually truly build this, you need like a 300 people team. And that's what it kind of
300 normal people.
burned me out. No, I mean like for
4
building.
kids from your school would have been fine.
Yeah, that's when I mean that was like realization like, okay. And so in parallel, very parallel to the story has been the AI thinking. Again, when I was 10, I watched the artificial intelligence movie, came out back then, which the movie itself is not actually, I mean, the movie is good, but it's not showing any of the like what we think about artificial intelligence, but it introduced the idea.
I know that everyone in the room and watching this is wondering because we're deeply confused. Which year are we talking about when you were 10? Because you look like you could be 20.
So when I was 10 in 2000.
Okay.
I think it just came out 2001, right? And so I watched that. I think we had a class trip to the movie theater or something. I remember that. Somehow remember that. But the idea got introduced, right? And then you had Matrix, which was very similar.
Good one.
I watched that and liked it a lot. So one of my stories and kind of short stories I was writing is actually about embedded worlds where like you're in a simulation, but that simulation runs inside another simulation and inside another simulation.
Like Inception?
Yeah, but it's actually like computer code. And so you can break out and you can break effectively the VM you're in, but you can also try to break the VM that VM is in.
See, that's how we explain VMs to people. Because I saw Microchip, from Beta, Midbase, explaining that he's running a Python VM on something. And I was like, explain it like I'm 12. It's a Docker. And I was like, okay, a 12-year-old that doesn't know what Docker is. Like, I'm slowly getting my head around virtual machines. But if we had it like
it's
a
like Inception.
game,
Yeah, you're like inside somebody else's dream. And so you can only do stuff that dream allows you to do. And you cannot escape except when you can. And then you break these things.
That's awesome.
Anyways, I've been trying to do some AI stuff for a long while.
So what was the idea? Because when we say AI, I guess most people would either have the most recent frame of reference, like you chat with something, or they just don't know what it is. It's just
Good
magic.
point, yeah. So I was like, in my head, I was imagining like fully, effectively sentient being that's fully digital, that is working with you and is your effective partner.
Your sibling.
And well, you fight with siblings, so partner.
Better.
And effectively is able to execute any action on the internet, like do anything, able to write code, able to do things. And because I was coding and writing games, etc., and felt like I need more hands, I was like, it would be really cool if the AI can write code. And so
age 10.
That was more like 14. So I was trying to do smaller experiments and I was learning about neural networks back then and trying to figure out how all this stuff works. When I was selecting where to go, the degree I went to, they were like, okay, we're going to teach you neural networks. We're going to teach you expert systems. Like,
did you do computer science?
Applied math, actually.
Still in Ukraine or were you?
Yeah, in Ukraine. Yeah. And at the same time, my family is from very humble means, let's just say. And I was like, okay, I should find a part-time job as well. And so a friend of mine referred me to this machine learning company who had a small office in Kharkiv. And I was like, oh, awesome. I can actually learn machine learning from people who actually know what they're doing. And so I started working there. So effectively, I would study like 9 to 4, go to the office, stay there until 10, go home, do some homework, pass out, do that.
I think Steve Jobs did the same thing. I mean, he was, in the storyline, he was just returned from India and like a very smelly hippie. But I think he also had an overnight shift at this computer company. And, well, they gave him the overnight shift because nobody could stand his smell during the day. May not have been the case with you, and I have to check my references on that one, don't quote me. But some similarities. Now, this is a very interesting childhood, but it could be the childhood of any kid in the US, in Canada. So if you were 10 in 2000, you would have been just after 1989 and I guess like the breakup of the USSR. I don't know if you have any memories of you growing up that really instilled in you, I don't know, something about corruption or like centralized authorities, or did your parents or grandparents pass that down onto you? Like, how do those two intersect?
Yeah, that's another thread as well. I do remember so when USSR split, Ukraine became a separate country.
Because it was actually 1992, right?
Yeah, 92.
Belaveza Accords.
And
I have a useless history degree.
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, something useful. And so the first currency was coupons, and I remember vividly going like, I don't know, I was maybe 6 at the time, 7, but the price of bread is going up effectively every few months, and it's not like by a little bit, by 10x effectively.
You're like, is this the same bread?
And so I remember that feeling of, yeah, effectively we were poor, and so we the only thing like what helped the family survive, we had a plot of land that my grandparents got 40 years ago, and so we were growing our own stuff. Like I actually worked there in summers farming and getting potatoes out of the ground, and getting the seeds out of the sunflower was like a nunchuck style thing.
I'm sure that you were thinking, I gotta build some motherfucking robots to do this.
I wouldn't say that automating everything around me is not inspired by some of that, but yeah, we did a lot of, like, we had effectively our own food grown because we didn't have that much money, and currency devalued, so whatever you receive and my grandparents' savings from USSR all disappeared. Like we still, like back in Ukraine, still have those books from like Sberbank of USSR, which says like, hey, you have this much money. And it's like, cool.
It used to be like a little passport, right? And they
It's like a little passport with a stamp, everything. It's like, looks very official old, but also like completely useless.
How fiscally responsible are we?
Yeah, so for me, like the centrally controlled money, have very direct experience with it effectively disappearing in different ways. Corruption is just like a normal thing in Eastern Europe. Just as a kind of story, somebody I knew, effectively, as part of the student union and some other university, distributing bonuses for students who are doing well. And as part of it, he's like, hey, you need to give me a kickback. and so somebody was protesting that he was distributing to do that. And he's like, look, I need to give a kickback to the dean.
Shit.
And the dean needs to give a kickback to the head. Like, it's kind of, the whole system is like that. It doesn't matter where you are in the system. There is kind of expectation that you need to, and part of it is they're paid very little. But the problem was like that. The mentality is.
That's why I left Venezuela, because I realized that the corruption was so deeply ingrained, it became a status symbol. But there are like a few words, a few expressions, like enchufado means literally like plugged in.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see someone, at the time it was like a Hummer and shit, and you're like, enchufado, like 100%. Like no one makes that money in the country. And the other one was like a chapa. It's like a badge.
Mm-hmm.
So you could literally pay cops to have a badge, and it was like immunity. And if you're like, oh, chapeando, like you just like anything, cut the line, whatever. And the problem is that it manifests itself in like small ways that you think you're winning.
Yeah, but
and
like
then in the
systematic
big way,
problem is
like,
driving country effectively.
When I turned 16, I was like, hey, mom, give me your car keys. And she's like, no, you don't have a license. And I was like, oh. So I go to school and you're like, oh, what a bitch. She doesn't let me drive. And my friend was like, oh,
buy a license.
He just gave me a phone number. He's like, oh, you just message this guy. He can help you out. I just texted him my details and whatever. I don't know where I got the photo from. And when he comes to drop the license off, it was a cop car. And for like a millisecond, I was like, I fucked up. I'm going to get arrested. This is how I go down. It's probably too young. Maybe if I thought it was going to happen, it was too young. And the dude was the friendliest human being. He's like, yeah, man, if you know anyone else, we've got a referral program. Like, and then I went to Australia, and getting a license, it's almost harder than, you need to know how to drive.
Yeah.
So there are trade-offs that you see how the system is. If there's a human involved, it is inherently flawed or vulnerable.
Oh, it's that. It's also, as I said, it's like it becomes a systematic mindset thing where it presses from you from the down and from the up. And so you end up, everybody effectively gets corrupted in the system. You effectively bought a license, right?
And I also destroyed a car like 6 months later.
So
And we paid the insurance company. Should not be saying that, but it
yeah,
happened.
but I'm just saying, this is the fact of being in corrupt society. You effectively become part of that corruption. It's not like you've had a mental thought of like, okay, I'm gonna do something wrong. It's like, oh, this is easy. It like solves my problem. Let me just do it. Same as like if cop stops you and offers effectively to let you go for a bribe, it's a natural thing. Like, yes, I don't want to go to court and pay the fine, etc. You can do it here, but it's effectively breaks the system. And I mean, that's like the systematic corruption, I think, is a challenge that we really need to figure out how to solve. And by the way, worth mentioning, Ukraine got way better. So when I went back, so I left effectively because I was like, hey, if I want to start a company at any point,
You
back
left
in
like 2018.
I left in 2012, 11, 12.
Oh yeah.
And so even, back then I'm like, okay, if I want to start a company, it's effectively like the police will come, the fire marshals will come, the site inspection will come, all of them will ask for bribes. And you're like, by the time you're trying to do something. And when I went back in 21, things were so much better. So things improved massively. A lot of this like kind of base corruption was going away. There are still pockets of just pay police off if you're speeding. But that kind of like fear of effectively, if you do something, you effectively need to like pay everyone around you.
Yeah.
And it's easier to pay like mafia sometimes than police. Like that part started to go away. Again, still in pockets. And the services improved. I was actually very excited for Ukraine in 21, and I was planning to spend a lot more time there. Sadly, we had a bigger mafia effectively.
What happened?
Yeah.
Well, see, I think the universe is always conspiring to help you achieve your mission. I was also planning on spending more time in Ukraine. So in 2018, when I finished uni, I did a Euro trip. I went all the way from Vienna to St. Petersburg by the east. Now, crazy fun fact. With a Venezuelan passport, you don't need a visa to go to Russia, but you need one to go to Ukraine. And with the Australian passport, you don't need a visa to go to Ukraine, but you need a visa to go to Russia. So I did every single country except Ukraine. And a lot of people that I met along the way were like, dude, you have to go to Lviv. Lviv is insane. It is beautiful. Like the weather, the people, the food, it's cheap. So I was like a mental note. It's my bucket list. I got the Aussie passport 2022. And it's been bad timing since. I'm going to have to wait for that one, but.
You can go, actually.
So I've heard. Should we? Oh, no, you can't.
I can't. I mean, I can go. I just will not be able to come out.
If you need to smuggle some things through, just. It's interesting. When you mention systematic corruption, I think we can have that as like the human tier. And I'm thinking about like systems design as a computer tier. And I'm wondering how much can we override by having a computer designed system that humans engage with? And how much does that system eventually have to meet the reality that humans are corrupt? If we look at the DeFi, we've got you can pay bribes to allocate rewards. And there's a lot of concepts that we've really sort of built in because otherwise humans don't use it. So yeah, as a creator of an entire blockchain network, how do you think about those incentives that, Sybil resistance, risk vectors, all that crazy shit you think? I hope you've done.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. There's a lot of dimensions to this problem. In general, when we approaching designing something like blockchain or a protocol, you assume everybody is very selfish. You assume that they will follow protocol while it benefiting them. And they will try to scam the protocol when it will benefit them. Right?
Those are very good assumptions. As anyone that's been online for more than 2 hours, it's a good place to start.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of design decisions, that's why blockchain is so hard to use, is because one of the reasons, but it's all the gas fees, everything is designed to have economic incentives or disincentives for a specific thing. Now, at the same time, being a user myself, I know how hard these things are. So on the other side is how do we design it so that people actually can use this, right? That's why, what are these are two competing effectively decision frameworks. Because when you're designing a consumer application, you're not thinking about people trying to scam it. You're thinking how to get people as fast as possible to the moment of delight. You're thinking how to get them to come back to your application every day. And it's a very different decision matrix. So on the blockchain, on a protocol side, you need to effectively be like as resilient to this as possible.
But on that point, centralized applications also have to deal with like malicious users.
Yeah, with scammers,
They just do it
everything,
on the back end. I was listening to, I think, PayPal back in the day.
Yeah, they had like ton of fraud, yeah.
But there was a guy that was famous. I think he was Russian, Igor or something. He was like boasting online about how much money he was just ripping off from them. And I think the story goes, eventually, the algorithm that they designed to catch him spun off and was the beginning of Palantir, like hardcore fraud detection and who knows what they're doing. But it's interesting how centralized teams just deal with that in the back end, and the blockchain has to be
the thing is like
resilient for everyone.
when you're a centralized team and you're dealing with fraud, you're dealing with like scam, you're dealing with DDoS, with Sybil, you have a set of methods to deal with it. But B, whatever you're doing, your adversaries don't know. They cannot go inspect what you've done. Nobody knew what PayPal was doing to prevent fraud. So you need to experiment and do things. And it can cost money or whatever.
Yeah, because
in blockchain, like everybody sees what you're doing. So you need to design effectively an economic disincentive for every single type of malicious behavior. And that again, that comes with it comes with a threshold of like experience that now it makes it harder to use.
So if we look at the real world, the legal services are very expensive and very slow, and that's a feature, not a bug. They want to disincentivize you from suing someone because otherwise the courts get overrun and the law changes slowly just in case people get a little bit high. And
I will like...
I'm building up. I'm building up. You just killed my punchline. So I feel like when we start looking at like the blockchain primitives, it starts with the same, like, economic security, we'll just make it expensive to fuck the other person up or the network. But I'm wondering, as we introduce new primitives, like even before you get to AI, or this could be greatly aided by AI, things like reputation. Could the blockchains uniquely capture someone's reputation or protocol's reputation so that you can start to do things differently? Like, it's pretty weird that in the real world, we walk around seeing people, but we have zero information about them. Like, reputation is built in a very primitive one-on-one basis, and then we get to AI. So the question is, when you assume that every user is malicious, what assumptions do we make if we start to create a network that we know will be used by a shit ton of AI agents?
So you assume not malicious, you assume selfish.
Which are slightly different.
Which is different, yeah. Malicious, I just want to bring chaos to the world, right? Selfish means if there's money to be made, if there's an opportunity to break the system to benefit, I'll do it. But if it's cost me more to break it, then I will benefit, I'll not do it. That's why there's an assumption that usually some percentage of the network is only small percentage is malicious and the rest is selfish to follow the protocol because that benefits them more, right? And I think selfishness is a really good assumption generally for any system. And so then from there, AI agents are effectively will be selfish. They have a mission, like they can be selfish toward their own bottom line or toward whoever spun them off or toward the DAO or toward the community that is actually the overseer or beneficiary. And through that lens, you can still see them effectively as like the line I use on blockchain. Blockchain is the ultimate. It doesn't matter who's on the other side of the address. It can be a person, it can be a cat, it can be an AI.
Cat.
Yeah, it can be an alien. It doesn't matter, right? Like you came to a commitment on a smart contract, and this is what's going to execute, right? So
that's how I feel using Borrow Cash. I'm borrowing USDC that is probably provided by a cat or No, it's it's a good analogy, I feel, because the example that people talk about self-driving cars is that sure, it's getting better over time, but the challenge is a self-driving car engaging with human drivers. But if all cars are self-driving, they can communicate amongst themselves in a much more cohesive way. So I was wondering, if that may also be true of an environment where there's a lot more AI players.
I think we'll always, same as self-driving cars, we'll always will need to assume there is a person somewhere which is may or may not follow the protocol, right? Even if that person just runs an agent that doesn't follow the protocol.
Someone
right?
who bought the license of a cop. Yeah, no, that's
Somebody
good.
bought like a burnt self-driving like
Yeah.
agent that's written in, Venezuela.
Oh, there's going to be
Dev shop.
Venezuelan teenagers having
Exactly,
like
yeah.
cracked
Building their
Raspberry
own,
Pi.
exactly, yeah. Just like put stuff on a wheel and it's like trying to drive it.
It's going to happen for sure. No, that's good.
FSD black market.
What about one of the questions I gave Maggie? I don't know if she gave them to you. I hope she didn't. In terms of lessons from sci-fi, could be warning signs or like aspirational. Like I just read I, Robot from Asimov. And if people haven't read it, I loved it because it was a series of interviews with the first robot psychologist. Who would have thought robots were also bound to break down? And it's interesting that basically every single story, the pattern is, look, there's 3 basic laws of robotics. If it goes bonkers, you go to that primitive programming into that. Like self-preservation, don't hurt a human, and
by inaction, yeah.
Yeah.
Don't hurt a human by inaction, yeah.
And the last one, which I think I've been referring to you, was this politician that people didn't know he was a robot. So they tried to set him up and somebody got on stage and he was like, punch me, I dare you, you're a robot, you cannot hurt a human. And he just whacked him in the face. So that was a great scene. Is it possible, or are people thinking of having similar guiding principles? Like, how do we program an AI agent? And how is it different from like automation?
So I think that's like in general, agent right now is used for everything because it's like such a hot word. It's like NFTs. Like let's NFTs everywhere.
It's like my real estate agent that picks up the kids and does my laundry and
yeah. There's a lot of different types of agents, and like literally a trading bot that you run that has no AI is an agent.
That makes you a lot of money. Buy my course.
You can have an agent that is just using LLM to understand context and then still do a bunch of like normal actions. And you can have an LLM that fully drives, like is running in a VM in its own world, having a computer there, being able to do a bunch of stuff. Like there's a pretty big spectrum of what agents are. You can have smart contract like Shell GPT, which is takes inputs from people and decides if it wants to do stuff or not. So very wide variety. I think there's few fundamental things maybe to introduce. So one is all the code right now that's been written so far is written by humans. Now is maybe AI augmentation, but still written by humans. And humans are flawed. We're flawed in translating logic into code. And so there's vulnerabilities everywhere. There's vulnerabilities in networking stack. There's vulnerabilities in operating system, in your phone, in the software you use to watch this right now. And those vulnerabilities, AI is actually getting better and better at finding. So it's actually going to be faster to attack systems and to defend them. And so what is the solution? So going to sci-fi, there's a bunch of sci-fi where there's a world where, everything like the Ghost in the Shell type thing, where people breaking into other people's computers, etc. And if that's the way, we are in a pretty broken state. But there is math. And math is...
1 plus 1 equals 3?
Math is something that is fundamentally different because like you can actually prove some specific set of facts and it's correct. Like there's no way to not be correct.
It's like formal verification?
Formal verification, yes. And it works in a composable way, right? If you know that this is correct and I want to use this function and correct in like for a specific set of properties that you're looking for, you can plug it into your own function that has a specific set of properties itself. And if this properties if this function proves a wrong thing that you need, it'll literally not prove your program. It has this composability similar to zero knowledge proofs as well. If there's zero knowledge, you can like compose zero knowledge proofs. Here you have composed actual proofs. And so if we assume the world where we can efficiently prove and generate code out of this mathematical proofs, what we can do now, we can actually describe mathematically set of conditions that we don't want to happen on different levels. I'll give you a blockchain example to start, and we'll go to AI. So blockchain example right now, you go to borrow cash, you borrow some money, and it's, there's a wood here. Yeah.
Something manifest wood.
You go to Compound and
Thank you.
and you borrow some stable coin, but the Compound doesn't give you any guarantees. That you put some collateral there, but there's no guarantees that this collateral will not disappear, that there's no bugs in the code.
It actually happened to me early day Polygon with a Compound fort.
Yeah.
Which was definitely manipulated, and my collateral was gone.
So now imagine when you're putting collateral and borrowing money, you also add a condition that under no circumstances, this except liquidation, like you effectively have a conditions when your money can be moved out. Right?
And by whom?
And you can also have like, hey, and nobody who is from excluded countries can touch this money. So now when you submit this transaction, you have your effectively theorem attached to it. And so the lending market needs to have a proof when it transacts with you that it actually matches this condition. And if it doesn't match, a transaction doesn't go. It literally fails to execute. And if it correctly matches, then this guarantees now, because the code is generated from the proof as well. So that is a fundamental framework for effectively moving us away from this broken code everywhere to actually have a composable provability of everything. And now let's go outside of blockchain. You can do the same with AI agents.
Well, we're on the blockchain. So you're describing the general internet, like literally everything? Because I remember Nick Szabo smart contracts paper, like way back, the vending machine example was what really made it click for me. It's like either the money is in or the money is not in. And there's only one outcome. It gives you the money back or it gives you the product. So that programmable logic and in a closed circuit, it was easier to understand. Those type of smart contracts sound a lot like what you're describing with formal verification. So I'm wondering.
But now smart contracts like keep your money for a long time, issue another token.
But they can also be vulnerable.
Trading with your assets on some other exchanges, etc. You need to prove that it will not lose your money in next.
So I guess my question is, the formal verification can also be applied to smart contracts now.
It's actually already been applied to smart contracts. The problem is it's a very manual process. It takes for 1,000 lines, it can take 3 for people to prove the contract. And so that's very ineffective. And on top of it, because of so ineffective, we have so little proofs, there's no machinery to do this kind of per transaction verification. Right now, it's only verifies, the designer of smart contract says, well, it should do this. They verify it. They spend 3-6 months. They're like, okay, cool. Think of this as an audit. The contract does it. We deploy the contract. But now I'm, as a user, I haven't seen what they proved for. So I don't actually even know if what I want the smart contract to do and what they proved is the same thing, right? So there's no this composability where my transaction I'm sending it. I want this proof when I'm sending transaction, not when they deploy the contract. I want it for my use case or another smart contract, right? It's a composable system. Another smart contract wants this smart contract to not lose its money. How does it has this guarantee?
Maybe we can speed up the process of verification by giving the verifiers 100 lines of cocaine. I'm kidding.
So this is actually where, again, AI comes in because, and there's already
better than my alternative, but
yeah, I mean, you should try feeding cocaine to AI. Let's see. This can be a good art experiment.
Paraguay, I'll meet you there.
Colombia.
You name the city, I'll meet you there.
But so right now, there's already been a bit of research. DeepMind done some good work on this, where you effectively have a symbolic kind of proving, and you use transformers effectively as a intuition to search in the proving space. And so one of the competitions we're going to be launching on Near AI Research Hub will be to effectively do that. It's actually right now on the bottom thing, launching soon.
By the time this goes live,
yeah,
probably I'll link it up and
yeah. So because we think this is a fundamental component both for blockchain safety and actually for AI safety, because you can have the same effectively process with AI agents, right? You don't actually care, same with people, right? You don't care, I don't really care what's going on in your head. I care that your actions.
Maybe you should.
The question is what translates into actions, right? And so we have laws that restrict set of actions, right? And Now, the problem is laws are written in language, and now there's interpretation, and you yourself is freely roaming in this virtual machine. And and you can do actions and then repercussions come later. But with AI agents, we can actually put them into a virtual machine where we enforce that their actions outside of virtual machine are constrained by specific mathematical laws, right? So we impose that do not harm humans if we can mathematically express that, but we can at least say like don't lose money or don't trade tokens that don't have, for
Don't
example, if
buy
it's an AI,
Cardano.
yeah, if it's AI trading bot and it's like whatever, it maybe got broken, maybe got wrong context, it maybe just went crazy.
Oracle.
And it's like, yeah, Oracle mispricing, etc. You can have the set of criteria around the bot itself saying you cannot have a trade on a token that has 10 token holders, for example, right? You can restrict whatever the kind of set of criteria you want, and like only the trades that satisfy this formal kind of theorem will actually be executed. So again, this system scales to any shape and form while we can express it effectively in mathematical statements. Now, we as humans are also not very good at that. And so
You keep saying we as humans.
you as humans are not very good at that.
Thank you.
And we as AIs will help you as well. And so you'll have a natural language interface where you can describe, and it will also infer what, for example, you don't want to lose money, etc. And it can actually generate the conditions as well and help you explore them and understand them. And obviously, software on top will make it easier and simpler. Your AI assistant will be there for you to really protect you. But that's the system. It's like you as a user will have a kind of a layer that is creates set of formal proof how you want to interact with other partners and external users. And if you're deploying capital or deploying resources or providing services, what attestations would you want, what set of criteria you want. And similarly on their side as well, like maybe, like you're from a country that they don't want to participate, maybe they need you to confirm something because regulatory, right? You need to actually look at terms of service, etc. Like all of this is effectively kind of part of the framework, and the framework is intense. The intents themselves can have a set of rules and criteria on how they're going to get executed.
Bit of branding here. Maybe run this by Yadira because I remember what you wanted to call this conference, and maybe branding is not your forte, but remember Chad?
Great. Chain abstracted developer.
Yeah, maybe that's a pass. But what about this AI, artificial intelligence? Yeah. What about we coin II, intense, that like intensity?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people already been trying to do all the puns and intense.
Yeah.
There's also intense.
Not a bad one going out camping. Yeah, that brings me to the most controversial topic of all, pronunciation. There's a few words that I think we should think carefully being a multi-planetary community as we are. One is near. There's always been something in the back of my mind that near is a compound sound. Like EA being E, it's only in English. And as I travel the world,
near,
searching for the meaning of life, sometimes I have to spell it out to people. I only found out recently that I think Skidanoff picked the name through the book The Singularity is Near.
AI is near.
Did you pick did you have a say in the name, or were there any other options on the table?
Near AI made so much sense.
Okay. So it was like,
makes sense. Absolutely.
Any chance of changing it?
No.
Okay. Now, Maggie's going to come in and throw something at me very soon. I'm starting to get a bit anxious and sweaty. So I think everyone knows that you had a stint at Google and did something there. There's a paper out there.
I did a few, but yeah.
Yeah. Most cited. I'm really curious. So since we announced AI developer, there's been a lot of, let's call it Web 2 AI frameworks coming out. There's Curse and Copilot and Replayed, etc. Some of the challenges that I sometimes have is trying to match the Web 2 and the Web 3 versions, especially as they seem to be converging towards AI.
I mean, the thing is, the Web 2 and Web 3 is the thing we invented as a space to differentiate. Nobody else cares.
True.
And so the reality is we have a primitive that add a financial system to programming. This is something that you don't have in traditional coding. Like you open up an IDE and start writing code. If you
And
want
it's
to,
just
if you
there.
want to deal with money, it's really complicated. And with blockchain, it's there. Import near API.js, and boom, you have money and everything in this. You have identity, you have marketplaces, you have like more things, but the primitive is you have the financial assets, and now you can do stuff with them, and somebody should own them, so you have identity. Now, AI is moving out of, hey, this is a cool lab backend thing, to like, hey, this is a front end thing and it needs money. So this is where the convergence is. At the same time, on the research side, this is a point I'm making, is like, we need to figure out how to monetize open source, because right now we all effectively benefiting from few companies who are open sourcing their stuff. And it's A, not as good as closed source, and B, at any point of time, they can decide like, no, we should stop. And then on the other side, you use Cursor, you use Copilot, all the data goes to Microsoft and OpenAI. And so how do we, Cursor actually uses open source model. Well, they use GPT-4 as well. How do we turn that around? Well, if we monetize, if we have a privacy computation, that's the tools that are useful for AI model, like for AI builders. Like it's more, here's the new tools for AI builders versus let's pull everybody into Web3. We need to break out of this mindset, which we created because it was a very antagonistic environment.
Oh, no, for sure. I guess that, so for instance, Vadim, you know Vadim, yeah?
I do.
Yeah, good guy. So he asked me yesterday, like, hey, you have ideas. Let me know if you want to build an agent,
Mhm.
because I think some of the tooling that he's been working on, it's getting pretty good.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've enrolled in YouTube University. I've been looking at some tutorials
Yeah.
and doing some, basic agents with some frameworks out there. And for a moment, I had that sort of confusion, like, okay, where would the tooling, like I'm using N8N to like literally match things together, and there's a super base RAG. And
Yeah.
so I was really curious, like, okay, if I give you like a few agent ideas, if we could try to identify, okay, which components of that stack could benefit from like that decentralized AI stuff that we're building, or even just which areas would be
Well,
interesting.
where you're touching money, identity, permission,
So for instance,
attestation, dispute.
the incoming administration in the US, I think they've got a portal where people can submit ideas and people debate them. So my mate Ollie and I were like, oh, let's just create like GOPT. And you could do something very similar. It could be a chat interface people submit. It could be anything. It could be feedback, ideas. But then try to aggregate that in a way that it's actually useful for whoever is trying to assess it. And you can see how the key thing would be like mass coordination between people. And this is where I'm like thinking, okay, I could patch something super basic with NAN or some of these other tools that may or may not be open source. And yeah, where would we potentially build a better version, or where would some of our tooling become relevant?
Well, again, I think there is things that are useful now, which is, as I said, identity, attestations on identity, payment, markets. And that's why the examples were showcasing, buying stuff, creating new assets. Like those are examples where this is something that you will not be able to do, or you'll need to patch a lot of stuff together and it's not robust. And the other part is kind of privacy, is autonomous software, which we're working on. That is more of a values thing than and this is more, going from Internet Explorer to Firefox, right? There's features, but also values. And it will start with a smaller group who value the values, people who are at conference like this, which is about sovereignty. And then it will
Is
spread
it?
to
I came for
others.
the free food.
But yeah, you can use LangChain, you can use other frameworks on top of Near AI agent stack. It's not like the frameworks themselves, you can use whatever you want. It's more that they run in a specific environment. Each agent has its own computer to run this. It can go on the internet, it can execute programs, it can write code, it can run it. So it has all of those things. It has, a public key and private key to send transactions on its own behalf or on behalf of the user. So it can execute different things. You can use chain signatures to execute things across all chains. You can use chain signatures to permission what your agent can do on behalf of a user as well. So
I did my first chain signature transaction this morning. I bought
Congrats.
BTC using
I
USDC
saw
and
your
Near.
tweet, yeah.
You saw the tweet. There was some troubleshooting overnight.
Okay.
I was like, I may have just lost $1,000. Being an early adopter, it's always a joy. But final question, deep and meaningful. If you were not doing Near right now, parallel timeline, Near never happened, what would you be doing? Everything else is similar except Near doesn't exist.
It probably will be an AI effort, and so probably will be somewhat similar to what we're doing with Near AI.
And would you be on the Sam Altman camp?
Probably
Or-
not, but
See, because this is what I'd like to do with the podcast, and in general, what I'd like to see when we think of like the personalities in different industries, when we think about the key stakeholders, power brokers, etc. How do people rise to those positions? For me, it's mostly storytelling. You obviously have to do some work as well, but I think that it'd be interesting to see. Okay, if we've got Sam Altman on this side, and he's maybe closed source and evil, who would be a potential counterpart? Elon? You?
well, hopefully us in a few months.
You heard it here first. Illia, thanks so much.
All
What
right,
a
thank you. Yeah.
pleasure to finally have you on. Hopefully it won't be the last one.
Do
Good
more.
luck with your next interview. It's going to be boring, I'm telling you.